What's up, guys? On this episode of Pistonhead Garage, the 2J is back from its rebuild, and it's time for me to reassemble it and put it back in my car. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Pistonhead Garage. I'm Garrett, and on this episode, I'm reassembling my 2J, and I'm going to put it in my car because I'm getting tired of it sitting, not doing anything. So, if you didn't see my last video, or if I didn't explain it in the last video, the reason why I sent the motor out for a rebuild is because I bought this from an importer when I put the swap in originally, without really knowing the kilometers that were on it or the overall condition of the motor. I did not do a compression test, so this way I'm basically freshening up the motor so everything is new. I've got new rings, I've got new bearings, still the original rods and pistons, but the cylinders are freshly honed. Every gasket's being replaced. So essentially, aside from the the rotating assembly not being brand new, everything is pretty much as new as I could get it. So when I go to add more boost this year, I'm not going to blow it up, or at least I'm less likely to blow it up because I know I'm starting with a fresh motor. So that's kind of why I decided to do this. So anyway, I'm not going to show you every single step of what I did to reassemble the motor, but at least I'll show you the gist of it. You'll kind of see it going together. I mean, tons of people have built 2Js on YouTube, so there's really no point in me showing you every last step. Just the good parts about it going in the car, and hopefully in the next video you'll see it start. So anyway, before we get into the actual build, I'm just going to show you a cool little thing I learned about painting stuff, engine parts obviously in this case. So while Jacob and Clayton are enjoying grid life, you guys who couldn't make it there can enjoy this video. So stay tuned and watch it come together. Now, one neat trick that I learned from Eric the car guy for doing this sort of stuff with tape. It doesn't always work perfectly, especially when there's lots of little intricate flanges and stuff like that, like in this case. So this may not look as good as I hope it will, but at least I'll kind of show you what he did. So you tape everything off flat like this, and then you take a hammer. I don't know if it matters what material it is, although he used a metal hammer, a steel hammer, probably because it needs to be, well, you'll kind of see as I go. But you have to be extremely careful with this method because you could damage things if you're not careful. Basically all there is to it, if I want to cut this little flange, this little tab out here, take the hammer, and you just tap along the tape like that. Just follow it along. Like so. A little over here. Then, once you've tapped all the way around, it basically, tape more or less just falls apart like that. And it's a really, really clean line that you end up getting that way. But like I said, in certain areas where there's, I think down here there's some little nubs that stick out, that might be a little bit trickier. Yeah, right here, there's a little nub thing that's sticking out. That might be hard to get into because there's a little crevice there, and obviously a large hammer is not going to do that. So, of course, in that situation, it may be better off just to take the knife and kind of go around it like that. This is a pretty good surface that you could trace, I would believe. Let me just, not very good at this sort of thing, so we'll give it a try. So yeah, something like that. Downward strokes. Nice and smooth, follow the curve, blah blah blah. And I mean that's not bad either. For what I'm doing, that's actually more than enough. So for this particular piece, I'll probably just use the knife for the whole thing. But in a larger thing, like say a diff casing, for example, if you've seen his video, the hammer method works really, really well. So let's get back to this here. Now you can see that with a really tight corner here, an outside corner, it's hard to do this with a knife properly and get a clean cut. Whereas the hammer actually probably would have worked better for this particular thing. So if I take now, of course it's too late now because I've already used the knife, but if I take the hammer, kind of tap on there like that. And like I said, you got to be really careful. You do not want to hit this hard because you're going to dent the aluminum. And of course this is a sealing flange for the intake, so you don't want to damage that flat surface at all by like pushing up the edge or whatever. So definitely take your time. It doesn't take a lot of force to break the tape. And I kind of do like almost a brushing motion sometimes when I'm doing this. It to me it's like it creates almost like a blade. Because the surface is so flat, the edge is nice and sharp. Now, this tape is a little bit stronger than the stuff I probably should have used. But like normal masking tape or painter's tape it'll tear really easily with this method. It'll just kind of fall off. But this isn't too bad. You can see it's for the most part. Right, then you just kind of run your thumb around the edge to clean up anything that might be hanging out. There's not much. It doesn't help that this casting isn't really that perfect either. It's factory castings aren't usually the greatest, but I don't have the time or the willpower to go through everything and like remove all these lines and casting imperfections, blah blah blah. That's just too much for me in this stage. I'm not that hardcore because in the end, like when it comes down to me wanting a pretty looking intake, I'll end up just replacing this with a front facing manifold from like Hypertune or something like that. I just don't feel like spending $2,000 on an intake right now just to get 600 horsepower. So this is what we'll do. Stock manifold with a nice ghetto wrinkle paint job. Now you can see this little nub here is becoming a problem. Just got to carefully tap around it. It's not that important to the actual manifold, that piece, which is nice, but yeah, it's kind of a messy. It's a really stupid thing. I believe it has to do with the way this was cast. These little nubs might have been air holes to allow the fluid to allow the molten aluminum to flow in and make sure there's no air bubbles in the casting itself. But because of it, it left those nubs, and they didn't think it was worth their time to get rid of them. Frankly, I don't blame them because I mean it doesn't affect the performance of the vehicle at all. So, but for me, trying to mask off this thing, it sure is a pain. But like I said, if I happen to miss a spot just a little bit, I'm not too worried about it. Alright, and there is the taped off runners. There was a bit of stuff that's not perfect, some edges and that, but that's part of the reason why I'm going with a wrinkle coat, is it'll cover imperfections. You can see this, the casting is really rough. It'll be better off if I just kind of cover it with a textured finish, and these runners are also still sort of hidden underneath the intake manifold, the upper part of it, so it's not a big deal if there's some stuff that isn't perfect. So this is ready for final cleaning, but before I go ahead and clean it for paint, I need to install some inserts in here. So you can see here, this is what I'm talking about. I've got to install some inserts in there. Reason why is these are a 14mm injector precision, and the a little bit of play in there. So in order to remedy that, the fuel rail kit that I got comes with these aluminum inserts. They just go in there like that, and then your injector fits in there nice and snug. I'm not gonna push that in because then I'll get stuck, and you're supposed to lube those anyway. So you can't just sit these in here like this. Obviously that's not gonna work. They're gonna leak, and you definitely don't want air getting in around here or anything like that, because then you're gonna screw up your tune. So in order to fix that, we just apply a little bit of RTV just along the inside edge here or on the inside of here. I'm not sure which yet, I've decided. And then we'll shove them in there and let that dry for 24 hours before I go and do anything else. Alright, so now on to the meat of it. The head is on the block, complete with new titanium valve springs and retainers. The next step is to install the upgraded cams and torque them down. Now that the cams are in place, I can install a brand new VVTi solenoid as well as the cam gears. Next up comes the timing belt. This turned out to be a real pain in the ass, so let's just skip ahead a bit. Once I have the lower timing cover in place, I can install my Titan Motorsports crank pulley. Next up, the cam and crank sensors are installed. Then I installed the alternator and PHR alternator pulley. I then installed my new fuel rail along with new FIC 1000cc injectors. With that all complete, it was time to figure out my Mishimoto oil cooler setup. Okay, so I'm just going to pull the tape off from when I did my paint job here. I got this little insert. This is from Drift Motion. It's just an adapter, a threaded tube. You can probably get this made somewhere or buy a tube that's threaded like this, but I bought this from them because I've done a lot of business with them, and I just like that it's just going to work. I don't have to worry about it. So the reason why I need this is because normally there's a big water to oil cooler here where coolant is flown through this cooler and then it goes out and cools the oil. And it has its own bolt that bolts in here, and there's no way to fasten this to it without this. So this just threads in like that. And I believe, yeah, it does thread in basically till it bottoms out. Like so. So you can see this will fit on there. Like that. Now let's grab an adapter that fits this. So I believe this is the one that fits. Let's take a look. Yep, that's the one. Of course I'm unthreading this tube. I'm just going to kind of test fit this before I go ahead and mount it permanently. You can see there's an issue with these lines, with the outlets here. There's only so many places they can go. It's looking like I may have to get some adapters here to go 90 with that so I can get this to go the direction I want it to go. Because it seems like it's going to want to go this way. That's okay though, because I'm going to probably delete this AC compressor here. So we're going to put it this way. I want to make sure that nothing's hitting on anything under here. Looks like everything's good. So this will fit. Which it does. That's basically all there is to it. Now, I'm not going to do that for this video because I'm lazy right now, but before you tighten this down, put a little bit of oil on the O-ring on the back side of it. It just helps create a good seal and keeps the O-ring from drying out. The same thing goes for the actual oil filter. Put oil on the O-ring for the oil filter before you tighten this down, so that way it makes a good seal. It also allows you to tighten the filter down easier because it slides a bit better. You don't bind the O-ring up and pinch it and stuff. I think that's more of what the concern is. So that's basically all there is to it. Once this is on, I'm going to put the filter on, and then I'm going to tape off these so as not to get dirt and stuff in here, and we'll be on our way. So I've got a couple options here that I'm kind of toying with on how I'm going to mount these. I'm going to put the oil cooler in front of the power steering cooler, mainly because I want air to hit this first, because this keeps the engine cool, which is where my main problem is. This is just an added bonus for me because I'm not really going to need it all that badly. But of course, in order to do that, I need to mount these together. Now, conveniently enough, the mounting holes are pretty much dead on. These ones are slotted on the coil rad enough that I can actually use the same kind of bracket for both. Now in terms of mounting them here though and routing the lines, this is where things get a bit more complicated. I've reinstalled the factory mounts for my factory side mount intercooler. I figured if I can reuse those, that would give me halfway there, at least in terms of mounting it to the car. And as you can see, this would go just like that, and then this would go in front of it. So, very possible. The only downside here is that they're on an angle. And there is a factory scoop that sits about here and directs air into it that came with the car, but I'm not sure if it would fit well without a lot of modification. I'm not sure how I would attach it in front of these because it only bolts the intercooler that goes here, so there's no provisions for that in this situation. So I'm not so sure exactly if this is going to be the way I want to go. The other issue, of course, with no matter what setup I do, is I'm probably going to need to modify or make new lines for the Mishimoto oil cooler. It comes with two, I think, 5-foot lengths of stainless steel braided hose ready to go. Unfortunately, it's A, a little too stiff for my liking, and B, way too long. Where I'm locating it here, it only needs about 2 feet, 2.5 feet to get to the oil cooler sandwich plate. It's really, really close, whereas the existing hoses would go all the way over there. And that's designed for if you want to come under and loop up to in front of the rad here, which is, I don't want to put anything in front of that if I don't have to, so I like this location still. And of course the chase base setup gives me this nylon braided hose rather than the stainless steel. Less abrasive resistance, of course, but way more flexible, and for my purposes, way more versatile. So I like that, and I do also like that every fitting on here swivels in any way possible, so that helps figure out the routing. But I think either way, I have one line coming out through the one of the factory holes for the old intercooler piping. That one for the return line to the reservoir is perfect, but the one on the inside here that would go to the power steering rack doesn't really have anywhere to go conveniently, so I would probably have to drill a hole up here for that line to go through, which isn't a big deal, it's just something I have to think about. So the other option is to mount this like this. Remove this bracket down here and then mount them like basically dead on, like so. Now the issue here, of course, is they're going to have some sort of angle like that, but further back to make room for the bumper to clear it all. So that requires a lot more guesswork and measurement and that sort of stuff. Whereas putting it this way, I know that if I stayed inside this point, I'm not going to interfere with the bumper coming around. So, I mean, there's kind of a back and forth with it. Either way, like I said, I have to make new lines for the oil cooler. I may have to make a different line for this side with a straight up fitting, or like I said, probably just do a hole through the side of the engine bay to get the lines in, because I could mount this upside down, but then I have more lines looping around behind it. Could be impeding airflow, just stuff like that I'm not sure I want to deal with. So that's where I'm at right now. Either way, I bought some of this flat stock. This is just what, like 3/4 inch or 1 inch? Yeah, 1 inch by, I don't know, whatever you guys think that is, thickness, just from a local parts store. I bought this, so it's going to basically end up being my brackets. So they'll bolt up here, right, with the two units side by side, and then I'll just put some bends in this to basically bend it in an L to bolt up to the stock location. Another reason why I like this is it just kind of makes the brackets a lot easier to build, but I still have to figure out what I'm going to do with these damn lines. So anyway, let me toy with it some more and we'll come back and see what I figured out. Okay, so I've made a little bracket on the one side here that bolts to the stock bracket that I've just reversed, and that holds it at the angle that's more direct. But of course I'm not sure that's going to fit with the bumper. So before I do any more fabbing, I put the crash bar back on. I'm going to try to mount the bumper and see if there's what kind of clearance issues are here, if any, and if I can clean them up easily or if I'm going to have to do a bunch of work. So let's see how that works. Okay, so this isn't perfect because I'm missing the support here, and this sits up a little bit higher, but looks like we actually have clearance. Let me just unhook you here. Oh, that looks sick. So there's the location of it, and if we look in here, you can see there's probably a good 2 inches or so of clearance between the mesh and the cooler. Plenty of room on this side, of course, and the power steering cooler mounts in behind the oil cooler. So provided that the hoses don't get caught in anything, which there's plenty of room above it here, there's lots of room for the hoses to go above and then around. I think this is going to be exactly what we want. So I'm going to try to make another bracket that holds this side, and we'll come back when that's done. Okay, so here's what the finished brackets look like, and I think you can probably agree that they look like crap, but they're functional, so that's what really matters here. So you can see I've got, this is the OEM right here, and then that converts to this U-shaped bracket, and then I have the two mounted like that. So all I gotta do is powder coat and clean it up, and we're good. Alright, so up next, I've got a Mishimoto racing thermostat to go in here. So what this does is, rather than opening at standard OEM temperature, which is about 90 degrees Celsius, I believe, this one is opening at 68 degrees Celsius. It says it right here on the actual thermostat. So what that is supposed to do is help keep the engine cooler and allow me to, keep the engine lasting longer. I'm not going to be running in an environment where I'm going to need the heat, and this will hopefully help again with my overheating issues I've been having. The final steps before installing the engine are to mount the upper intake to the lower intake runners and route my new power steering lines. And finally, with the help of some friends, the fresh 2J gets installed. Well guys, that's it for this episode of Piston Head Garage. If you liked it, make sure you give us a like. If not, then give us a thumbs down. Make sure you also subscribe to the channel, because in the next video, I'm going to be doing all the finishing touches required to get the car to start, including the wiring, so stay tuned for that. As always, I'm Garrett. I'll see you next time on Piston Head Garage.